Hello and welcome to week 3 of EN 102 Business Writing. This week we have several moving parts again, but these are all building up to something that we'll be doing next week. And one of the reasons we're doing this is you need to understand that some of these projects take a while to work towards. We have often been trained in both high school and in certain college classes to try to work as fast as possible, get everything done. And the previous week's assignments on week 2 probably didn't take you a huge amount of time to complete. And week one's assignments, of course, were relatively simple. But as you have more and more complex assignments and more complex tasks in business, you may need time to draft, to plan, to figure out what's coming up next. There are a couple of things we're doing here. One, we're trying to get more of a purpose behind why we are so careful about our writing and how do we respond to feedback, and also examples of how MLA citation style works. So, obviously, going through this, the reading quiz is directed primarily at the readings from this book, from Successful College Writing, chapters 19, 22, and 23. We'll talk about those in just a moment. But if you'll notice that the writing exercise actually is focused mostly on a writer's reference book on page 391 through page 470. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of reading, but a lot of these are just examples to pay attention to. And in here, this will help you understand some of the concepts between MLA citations and other issues like that. One thing to pay attention to is any citation model, MOA, APA, Chicago, whatever else you may be asked to work in. It's just a way to reference where your information comes from and to help people understand that these aren't just ideas that you're coming up with on your own. And that's to help you look like you're more credible, like you've thought carefully about what you're trying to do, and that sort of thing. So all these references are just a set of rules in all the different styles. They have little particular things that that discipline is looking for particularly, but you are trying to just find out what it requires and follow the rules. Obviously, the textbook is useful for this, and this writing exercise here will help you understand some of those basics. But the main purpose is just understand that the rules exist for a logical reason, and whatever the style you're working in is, there you can easily find those rules. Obviously, if you aren't comfortable looking them up in the book, although this writing exercise will help you, you can always go to the Purdue Online Writing Guide right here, which this defaults to the MLA format style, but they also have it for APA and all the other format styles. I use this page constantly, as I've said before. So some of these things in here are just for fun, to help you. The misspelled grammar Nazi sketch from a comedy show, and other things like this. Some of these little cute little things to help you just kind of get the idea of what's going on, why we do this. The causal reasoning video, cause and effect, is meant for younger people, but it helps get the idea across pretty simply what this is assignment we're building up to is, which is an essay that analyzes what effects come from what causes, or sometimes what causes will lead to what effects. A lot of writing, especially in business, is about how did something happen or what will happen if we assume a certain set of parameters. The weekly reflection forum, of course, this time is talking about feedback. Now, not only is it talking about the feedback that you've received from week one, and you also be receiving feedback from week two coming up, hopefully before the end of the week. We have a week to respond to after the assignment is due to get the papers back to you, but hopefully I can get them back to you a little bit sooner this time. Um, and one thing is, I want you to consider how you respond to feedback, what you do with feedback, and how you give feedback yourself. There is a difference between critique and criticism, and that is an important difference. And I'm curious what you think about it and how you apply it in your own lives. And then, of course, there's a reading here about the cause and effect essay. This assignment is just available for you to look at to see what you will be doing eventually. This assignment is not due this week. What we're doing this week is preliminary work to help you get ready to write this essay. So feel free to look at the assignment and understand it. Do not try to write the essay this week. What we're doing this week are three things. We're doing the pre-writing of the cause and effect essay. So right here on page 474 of your book of Successful Writing, in the chapter about writing the cause and effect essay, just as you did with week 2, you'll go through these steps 1, 2, and you don't have to again answer every single question, but you need to let these steps guide you and indicate what you want to do. You can answer in short form how you're going to respond to these questions and how they're leading you to think. You can talk about which of these strategies you use to discover cause and effects, or you can talk about ideas you have. One thing I want to discuss a little bit about these idea generating strategies. A lot of people like to start at first with what's called a research question that leads you somewhere. For example, if I take this class, will this lead to a better job? Is the cause going to lead to an effect? And that's a good question to ask, and you can look at, and then you can use that to guide your research. You can start trying to find research about how degrees in certain fields can lead to successful jobs, that sort of thing. Or you can go even more broadly and go, what are the benefits of education? Start doing research, and from your research, have a more narrow question that comes out of that. So any method to get there is fine. You do not have to follow the same process every time. And as a matter of fact, it's a bad idea to try to make it happen the same way every time. In here, you should try to see if you can identify primary causes and effects. This is something that's helped a lot by research. You want to try to see if you can support that. You don't want to say, well, when I wear my KC Royals shirt, the Royals always lose, so I can never wear their shirt on game days. Well, that's clearly an improper cause and effect, but you can actually look at cause and effects for what does make them lose, or how superstitions are reinforced, or whatever you're looking for. So don't just come up with it on your own. Look for what the research guides you to. Obviously, you want to have evidence. So if you do have an assertion, if you think a certain cause or a certain effect comes out of something, if you can't find evidence to back that up, then you need to consider that your idea of what the cause or what the effects will be is incorrect. You need to be able to get used to the idea that you'll have to adjust your understanding of the situation based on the evidence you can gather. This is a problem we see a lot in much public discussion and business discussion. A lot of people try to find evidence that will only support their ideas rather than looking at what the evidence says and building ideas based on that. And obviously, from here, you want to draft your thesis statement and work through the various processes, how you're going to organize it, how you're going to draft it, and all that sort of thing. So that is the essay here. You can also look at other chapters as provided here to give you ideas of coming up with theses and what to figuring out what to write about. And as always, while you don't have to turn it until the end of the week, having this pre-writing done in advance is useful. So once you've come up with your pre-writing and you know what you need to look for, then the next thing you're going to do is summarize your sources, and that should come down to looking through any topic. It suggests that you use a Collins library, but there are other resources you can use. I'm going to show you two resources real fast that I use a great deal. I use Google Scholar for online searching. It's very useful. For example, I can do a quick search like that, and I can find a lot of vetted sources that are usually have scholarly backing, are peer reviewed, are available through various schools, that sort of thing, which are usually a higher level of sources than you will get off of just a typical Google search. And of course, the other one is Wikipedia. Now, the caveat about Wikipedia, which you should understand already, is that Wikipedia is not a source itself. It is a good place to go to look to get an overall view of a topic. It even has useful information, as long as you stay away from political or sometimes pop culture Wikipedia pages, which are often edited based on somebody's biases rather than just the information available. This is a good way to get an overall view of things, but you should not use this as your source. You should use this to help you understand it. And then all of these, you'll notice that they have these links here to sources, to references. These are good places to start. So if you're trying to discover a topic, especially if you saw something up in the main article that you think sounds interesting, you can come down here, see what the source is, and do a Google search for this, Scholar Google, library search, whatever, and use this as a source if you find useful information in it. So that's one of the ways I do a lot of sourcing. So that's what the source summaries are about. And then the last thing is analysis. So you will go to page 484. And you will look at this essay here, read through it carefully and thoughtfully, and then answer the questions from examining the reading, analyzing the writer's technique, and thinking critically. So these questions on these pages here, here, and here will help you understand how these essays are put together, what you're being asked to do, and what the differences are between things such as facts and opinions, that sort of thing. You don't necessarily need to respond to the reading. That's up to you if you wish to do that. So those are the primary assignments. Let's talk a little bit about the readings in the books. And so the first one, of course, is chapter 19, which is about cause and effect themselves and the essays. Again, you can have a cause, a single cause goes to a single effect, and you can also look at the effect that leads back to the cause. Either direction is fine. But remember that it is rarely that simple. So one effect can have a large number of causes, and a single cause can have many effects. In fact, of course, there are multiple, in most of the real world, multiple causes can have multiple effects. Sometimes they're not even that obvious effects. For example, the way people respond to certain acts can be based on a large number of contexts, including that person's personal life, what they experience and what they expect, as opposed to what's actually happening in front of them. So remember that the thesis statement here is more about what is going to happen and what leads to an effect and what possible effects could come from certain actions. Usually it's illogical. It's either in chronological, most to least, so the most important to the least important, or vice versa. And you want to try to explain each one. So if you identify a cause or you identify an effect, you don't want to be vague about it. You want to discuss it in some depth. So be careful about which ones are identified. You can say, for example, there are many causes to this, but we're going to focus on these three and then explain why you chose those three. And as always, there are several examples here of how these work. I highly encourage you to look at these examples because they're very useful. All right, so that is chapter 19, the main parts from that I want you to look at. From chapter 22, planning research project. So you want to understand the point of research, and the point, we have often been trained to come up with our own ideas and then try to find a quote or some sort of statistic that can back it up and drop it in there. That is not the right use of research. Research is there to inform your ideas, and if the research doesn't exist from solid, consistent sources, then you need to consider that your premise needs to be changed. And you always want to take notes. You always want to be careful about your sources. So not only are you trying to back up your ideas, but you want to have good ideas that are backed up. This may sound like a tautology, it may sound like that's circular, but again, if you can't back it up from the sources you find, then you need to look more closely at the sources and think about what your own ideas are. Understand what the assignment is. So in this, you want to find things that analyze causes. You want to see things that analyze effects. You don't want to just try to get something that says, here's what a situation is. You want to see sources that explain how the situation came to be. And of course, make certain your topic is narrow enough and interesting enough to lead you through there. And always, when you're evaluating sources, make certain that you understand whether or not the sources are useful. For academic writing, you want to try to primarily have primary and secondary sources. Primary sources being as close to the original research as possible. Either the original research report or somebody who was part of it, or eyewitness accounts or interviews, that sort of thing. You can also have secondary sources that explain what these are. For example, you can have academic texts that put somebody else's research into context and explain what that means, and that sort of thing. Tertiary sources are things such as Wikipedia or newspaper articles, that sort of thing. They're usually stories about stories about stories, and you don't necessarily, while some of them can be fairly accurate, they are also far enough removed from the original information that it can be distorted without it being meaning to be distorted. One thing you definitely want to make certain to do is know who writes it. So if you have an anonymous source, be distrustful. If you can't verify where it came from or who published it or when it was published, be careful with it. So for this, you only need a couple sources here, but try to avoid popular media sources unless you find something excellent or you have a good reason to back it up. And in the summaries you're going to write here, you're going to explain why you think this source is worth looking at. And it should be more than this came from a New York Times article, because New York Times may be a viable news source for many things, but is not necessarily the best way to get academic information. So that all comes under evaluating sources and learning how to choose reliable sources on page 570 here. And then, of course, the last chapter is not only about finding it, but understanding, taking notes. And this is where the summaries come from. So there's a large amount of writing here about using libraries. I'm a big fan of libraries. If you can't get access to the Collins Library at Baker University, either online or in person, you can always see if there's a local school, a local college, and ask if you can get some help there. They usually don't try to see your ID unless you try to check something out. But if you can just get there for a short period of time, ask for help. Reference librarians are like Google, only they can understand what you're trying to say, and they're usually pretty thoughtful about their responses. And of course, know how to do electronic searches, which is in this chapter as well. And then evaluating sources and taking good notes. The best thing about good notes is always remember that you shouldn't just tell me what something says, but why it says it or why you think it's useful information and how you want to use it. All right. So that's pretty much the basic overview of the readings and the assignments. If you have any questions about these, feel free to ask me either through email or during online chats or my message form, and I will see you later.